First impressions of the K24 and the NC Miata is that it completely transforms the car. We were able to go from fighting for 9th and 10th in the Gridlife Championship in 2024, where we predominantly had the 2.5 liter, to stacking up multiple podiums inside of Gridlife, both at Gingerman and Autobahn in Chicago. And the car is just unbelievable. It's well balanced, it has the grunt that it needs, it's got the top end that it needs, and it even just fits in the car perfectly well. With all those positive impressions, there's still things that we ran into throughout 2025 that I think are worth highlighting. And whether you are in a competition experience and considering this car or this chassis for that series, or if you're in a street car, there's a couple of things that we should probably go through that I've encountered in that first year. So right off the bat, the thing that we're gonna be looking at is the ECU relocation. Then we're gonna have to talk about the wiring harness. We ran into numerous times where the wiring harness was rubbing through, and that might have to do with the fact that we moved the ECU into a spot that pulled the wires a little bit too tight. Our tensioner pulley failed throughout this year. The oil pan cracked, and we went through 4 different power steering units in 2025 alone. So those are the things that are real quick hits that you're gonna run into. All right, so let's talk about the ECU location and why we ended up changing that. The ECU with the K24 K-Power kit is actually housed right here on the firewall, right where this electric power steering pump is actually placed. And it's very, very close to the exhaust header, even with the heat shield. Now, what I will say about this location is that I think it's a lot better than the OEM location of the ECU, which is on the front kind of crash bar section just to the right of the fuse box. The reason that I like this spot better, frankly, is because once you've added hood vents and as you've cleared out some space and exposed the ECU a little bit more in its OEM location, you do expose it to a little bit more water risk. That was never an issue for us. It's garage kept. The only time it ever really saw rain was to and from on the open trailer to the track, and then at track events. And it was never a high enough volume to really cause us an issue. But for a street car or something along those lines that is gonna see consistent exposure to heavy rains and you have the hood vents in this location, it can become a problem. So in that regard, this is a great spot for it. I think what we ended up seeing in our first event in 2024 highlighted the fact that for a track car with this application, with this setup, it's too hot of an area for the Haltech. So in our 20-minute sessions, we data logged that the Haltech was getting up to 190 degrees. And I only knew that was really a problem because the check engine light would start flashing on the dash, and we'd bring it back in. It would go into limp mode. I'd cycle the car, bring it back in, look at the logs, and say 190 degrees. That was a trigger for the limp mode. So Haltech even talked with us and acknowledged that, yeah, we could just raise the limit. 190 degrees isn't gonna kill the ECU. But my overall concern with that was what happens when I increase the limit and it hits that limit then? Where is the point at which it's going to be a problem? And given the fact that the Haltech ECU is one of the more expensive individual components of the swap holistically, I didn't want to risk the ECU itself. I didn't want to go through buying another one just because I decided not to move it. Given that we've got no heat, no AC, it was a super simple solution to move it into the passenger footwell right about here underneath the dash, which is also effectively just stripped out in a shell of itself. And so it made the wiring super simple. We actually run the harness underneath the cowl into the cabin where the HVAC normally comes through underneath the dash and plug it straight in. Super simple solution and keeps our temperatures down. Haven't seen that fault ever since we made the switch. So again, that was 2024 at our first event in Road America, and then we experienced it again in Blackhawk, and ever since then, never been a problem. This one's a little bit complex, and frankly, it's out of my realm of total understanding. So bear with me as we go through it, but something that had made me curious from the very get-go when we did the swap was that my expectations were the 220 horsepower that's pretty common with these, right? So I figured effectively I could drop this engine in, make that 220 and be close to at parity with my competitors who are also running K24s in that kind of 220, 230, 240 range. And that would give us a fighting chance, especially over the 170 horsepower. At Road America, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, to be perfectly frank. And it's such a long track that it hyper exposes any power discrepancies that you're going to be experiencing. So in 2024, right, coming into it, we were running a 91 base tune, you know, nothing specific for this car. So I had no real expectations. And frankly, it was such a night and day difference between the 2.5 liter to the K24 that I didn't even think about the fact that I might be down on power. And any potential inclination about being down on power was remedied by the fact that we were running a base tune on 91 octane. As we progressed into the 2025 season, it became more and more apparent that we weren't making the same kind of power as our competitors.
Clearing just about 80 miles an hour into the braking zone under our drone into turn 8. Look at that pivot from Feingold, looking really nice here. Now Bryant seemed to close up a little bit on this sector of the track last time by, but he's lost it again. Maybe a little bit more grunt or a little bit less drag on the front of Feingold's car, the left front protesting as it scrubs just a little bit.
Road Atlanta was our first event in 2024, and frankly, I'd never been there before, and the event was so wonky that we didn't really have an opportunity to identify whether or not we were numerous mile an hour down. The reality is that when we looked at some data for the back stretch of Road Atlanta, we were down a few mile an hour from some of our competitors. But it's easy to attribute that to the fact that we're in a 5-speed, running 512 final drive gear ratio, which means, you know, we're really strong in the low gears and under acceleration, and frankly, we lose our top end, and that's really down to the 5-speed. But it's a track that I wasn't familiar with, and it's very easy to chalk it up to, well, maybe we've got a little bit more drag, maybe it's the gearing that's holding us back, and heck, maybe we're just not getting good exits out of the corners, especially on one that is as crucial as turn 9 leading down into 10A and 10B. Having never been there before, I frankly just figured it was poor exit speed. I figured that was my biggest issue. And this being the first event for 2025 and the first, you know, full-blown event with the K24 and some of the other bugs worked out, didn't think anything of it. We went into Gingerman then, and that's where problems really started to rear its head. Suddenly at Gingerman, we were running into this intermittent issue where I would just lose. It felt like I was completely losing VTEC. Frankly, it felt like I was running on 3 cylinders all of a sudden, and I thought we had something catastrophic going on. Check engine light would flash, and I'd be super down on power. We were trying to track what the pattern of that may be, and because it wasn't always happening, right? It was an intermittent issue. And so early on, it seemed like maybe it was a temperature related situation, because early on in the morning, the car would pull great and feel strong. And then as the day would progress, I'd start to have the issue in the middle of the session. And then as that day kept going on, then I would have the issue as soon as I turned the car on. So we were checking data logs, had a bunch of people that were coming over because, you know, Gridlife is fantastic about the camaraderie aspect of it. And even your closest competitors are going to act like buddies and going to be buddies, and they're going to come over and try and help you figure out what your issue is. Basically, if somebody sees you with your hood popped and you're scrounging under there trying to figure out an issue, people are going to gather and try and help find that solution. So we started looking at cam position based off of some experience that our friends had had. Sure enough, the data logs through AIM was showing the cam position just going, spiking crazy. You could literally see it operating just fine, and then it would go completely haywire. And so right then and there, we decided to try and switch out the sensors. We switched out the sensors on the back of the engine, went out the next morning, car ran great. Okay, thought we had the solution. Reared its head again in the afternoon on Saturday, and it just kept getting worse. Now, with the Podium Sprint, we needed to make sure that our lap time was locked in, so we got in the top 5. But my biggest concern was the fact that Podium Sprint happens late in the afternoon, and that's where the car had been most problematic. Luckily enough, our Friday lap time in the 138s was good enough to basically seat us into the Podium Sprint, because the track just degraded throughout the weekend and people weren't able to go any faster throughout that time.
For CMP a couple of years ago, he spun at turn 1. We've seen him spin here at turn 9. I mean, it's so quick, but it's so darty.
Yep, and front-wheel drive cars, sometimes you have to set it up that way to get it to turn in on entry, and then you really rely on the front-wheel drive drivetrain to stabilize you on the exit, as Mike Bryant now comes to the line in that NC Miata.
And Feingold did improve slightly. Bryant did not. 148.98 is where he will stay.
So that was lucky. Since the sensors, the cam position sensors, didn't solve the issue, after a whole lot of driving around to different AutoZones to try and find some solution, since that didn't solve it, we ended up trying the VTC solenoid, examining that, not a problem. Kept looking at the data logs, but couldn't explain what was happening. Started to think maybe that it was fuel related. One of another friend of ours noticed that at low fuel, maybe that was causing some sort of an issue. Long story short, as the year went on, this continued to get worse and worse, and it culminated in the biggest issue at Road America, being a track that highlights any sort of weakness on power. I was pulling out of corners that I know well and have driven enough times to be familiar with what a good exit from that corner looks like relative to a poor exit. And even in cars in the same class with the same swap and all that kind of stuff, we were getting absolutely dragged on the straightaway. So now I had never dynoed the car with the K24 in it. Again, we don't have super easy access to a dyno where I'm at. And there was enough things to work through and enough learnings going on with this that I didn't think it was particularly relevant, and man, was I wrong. I should have done that right off the bat so that I understood what that baseline looked like. But long story short, Road America is finally where it came to a head, and I was like, I've got to get this thing on the dyno. I should not be getting dragged as hard as I am. Drag coefficients, 5-speed versus 6-speed, gearing, this, that, and the other thing, they're all important. Corner exits are important, yes, absolutely, but it was really bad. On the video, you can literally see us come out of the corner at the same time, and then just a massive gap happen from 14 to 1, from 3 to 5, hell, even from the exit of the carousel, flat through the kink, where other people are lifting, and they're still beating me into Canada corner. And so something just felt wrong. We put it on the dyno. Rick from Haltech was looking at it and noticed right off the bat that something wasn't right with the way that the logs were reading. It came back from the dyno. The first pull was 195 horsepower. The second pull was 197. The third pull was 203. And the fourth was 205. It's even at its best at 205, we're down 15 horsepower from where we should be, and it was pretty concerning that one of those pulls we were hitting 195. You know, there's plenty of variables to go into it. Luckily, we had a buddy who has a K24 in his BRZ. He went over to the dyno, same time, right after me, threw it on there, made something like 226 horsepower. So it's not just that the dyno was reading wildly low that weekend. Cars back to back, same temperature, same everything, same scenario, and we're down at best 20 horsepower. So that started to explain some things. So I wanted to start digging into more of what was causing that. We tried to piece everything back together for the Road America weekend. We were on the cusp of fitting into the podium sprint.
In front of the claim.
Look now, identical lap times for Feingold. Oh, that's because Feingold went to second. That's why, because guess who's leading now? Bryant in ClubTR. 232.836 jumped ahead of Feingold, and that's going to change the position there.
Look how close they are to 232.83 to a 232.84 to a 232.94.
Wow.
Basically all on the same 10th that lap, but it's Bryant who made the big move, and the big move means he's into the top 5 for ClubTR.
We were battling back and forth with a guy between 5th and 6th place, and you have to be top 5 to get into the podium sprint. Sunday morning rolls around, and the car was just completely dead, wouldn't function for a litany of reasons. One of them just being exhaustion, basically, and I missed a couple of things that needed to be reconnected and tightened down. We had pulled the valve cover. We had gone through the VTC solenoid all over again. We went through 3 of those trying to identify if that was the problem. We pulled the valve cover to look at the cam gear, which, frankly, everybody had told us it wasn't going to be the cam gear, but I was at a loss. I was trying to find any physical evidence of something going wrong because so far everything looked absolutely perfect. And frankly, just didn't get everything tightened down. It was late Saturday night. All our friends and family were out there. We were trying to, have a good time and, miss some things. So Sunday morning rolls around, and frankly, we didn't get to complete any laps. The car just would not run. So we had quite a bit of a break between Road America and the final event, which was Autobahn Country Club South in Chicago. During that time, Ron at RS Motors did just a phenomenal job at diagnosing the issue. It bugged him so much that it was keeping him up at night, trying to track down what was happening. Now, I'm going to butcher this explanation, I'm sure, but ultimately, through some sleepless nights of his and long hours on the phone with Haltech directly, big shout out to Haltech for helping him out and giving him the support they needed as they were doing the troubleshooting and chasing everything down. They ended up finding out that for some reason, the body control module's speed sensor signal was interrupting the cam position signal. So as the car would try and read cam position, after about 20 degrees, for whatever reason, speed sensor signal would trigger, and the cam position, the ECU would read the speed signal as the cam position and would go completely crazy. And it would frankly never come back until you turned it off, cycled it, and ran it again. I still don't understand how that happens or what the root cause is. Fortunately, Ron at RS Motors does understand what that cause is and came up with a solution for me. Was able to get it in a consistent place where he could actually properly tune it, and we were making 220 horsepower when we headed out to Autobahn. And that, frankly, is the only reason that I think we ended up doing so well at Autobahn, pulling home second place. That's the second time we've ever been to Autobahn. First time was at the end of 2024, with the car effectively the same. But this was an opportunity to really focus on learning the track and making improvements where, big gaps had shown themselves the year before from the data logs and the video that we were watching. That weekend wasn't without issue. We went through the tensioner pulley, the billet tensioner pulley failed. What ended up happening is I was keeping an eye on the power steering pump, trying to make sure that everything was good with that, had the car running, and I noticed the belt was moving and the tensioner itself was moving quite a bit, wiggling quite a bit. And there was also bearing grease that had been getting splashed all over the front of the timing cover. Turn the car off, grab the pulley, and I could move it a full inch forward and backwards. So, not sure, if there was anything that specifically caused that. What I found out is that K-Power's gone to a second version of that billet tensioner pulley. We were able to swap a new one on. Actually, Lou from K-Power pulled the new version off of his car in between his GLTC races, put it on my car so that I could run our track battle sessions, and then we'd take it off and put it back on his. And then Saturday night, because luckily they're local there, they were able to get me their version 2. We got that back on. I've got to think that that is a freak incident, something that isn't, like if you're looking to do the K-swap in the NC with the K-Power kit, that's probably not something that you're going to encounter. In fact, given that they're on a version 2.0 version of that pulley, nobody else is probably ever going to see that version 1 again. It's probably not going to be any sort of issue going forward, but it is something that we ran into to complicate the weekend further. But at the end of the day, with the car running well, wiring resolved, we had a good result. All right, so let's talk about the thing that plagued me the most right away from the first event that we had the swap done in the car all throughout 2025 season, and that is the power steering pump. So this is the OEM NC power steering pump. And the reality is I've seen these things fail on 2 liters and 2.5 liters that are tracked as well. So I don't think it's necessarily the K24's fault entirely that these are going bad, but I do think this swap exacerbates the weaknesses of the OEM pump, and ultimately this was the biggest headache that we dealt with, or at least the most frequent headache that we dealt with. So much so that I was bringing spare pumps to the track, and on the one event that I didn't bring a spare pump to the track, I ended up needing to buy one off of a fellow Gridlife guy running an NC who had brought one in his truck. That's how consistently these things go bad. Now, when you take the K24 and you rev it out to 8,000 or more RPM, I'm thinking that is just simply overpowering what this pump is designed for. Keep in mind, this was designed for an engine that is revving out to 7,000 RPM on a consistent basis. Then you put the 2.5 liter into it. You're still kind of running around that 7,000, 7,500, depending on what cams you've got in the car. And I think ultimately, this pump just gets overpowered. However, there is something specific to this kit that is done that I think makes it an even bigger problem for us. What had ended up happening, and what I think is a consistent problem, is this flange on the power steering pump right here had cracked in half. This hadn't happened on the previous power steering pumps that had failed on me, but with this system, the way that it's mounted, so it's actually set up right here on the car, the OEM configuration is actually for it to be flipped 90 degrees. So when we mount this for the K24 pump, this arm actually gets bent in order to create a smoother angle for the power steering reservoir. Unfortunately, because of the way that this is designed, being just a single bolt holding in this flange and then an O-ring right here, that puts a lot of pressure and a lot of angle on this flange, and it tends to warp. And then as it heats up, the warping gets worse, and eventually the O-ring no longer seats. Now, add to this the high levels of vibration that happen with the K24, and if you have too much tension on this arm, even after it's been bent and aligned to seat better, you're gonna end up breaking that, cracking that flange. So not only is the pump getting used at a much higher RPM at a much consistent rate than it ever was before, but now you've added stress to this arm and you're gonna end up cracking that piece. I'm not the only one that's gone through this. we're the early adopter for the car, but we're not the only one tracking these K24 NCs with this configuration, and a lot of people have gone through this problem. We ended up going through 3, and as I say that out loud, I kind of hate myself for not coming up to a solution in time, but really I was just trying to get through the rest of 2025 because we had enough other things to deal with, and the pump at the very least was an easy solution to fix trackside. And so what we did in the meantime, between Road America and heading into Autobahn, is actually my buddy welded up some brackets to hold this on and give a little bit more structural support to the flange to make it a little bit stronger. Unfortunately, that ended up warping the surface area, and it caused the O-ring to not seat properly. Ended up getting some just gasket maker and a thicker O-ring, slapped it in. This made it through Autobahn just fine, using the curbs, being really aggressive on the curbs at Autobahn, and this solution seemed to work. So what are the overall impressions after a year of competition with the K24 and the NC? I gotta say, it's absolutely phenomenal. We talked about some of the things that reared their heads throughout the season, and even a little bit about the solutions, although I'm planning to go into more depth about what we're gonna be doing in the 2026 offseason in some future videos. The reality is, we're one of the first people to be competing with this engine in this car, and we're not just doing it at local events. We're doing it on a national level, bringing in some of the most competitive drivers from across the country to compete in Gridlife. And we're having success in the very first year of running the car. Road Atlanta, we're set for the podium, hit a disqualification. Things are gonna happen. Second event, Gingerman at Midwest Fest, one of the biggest shows for Gridlife, brought home 3rd place trophy.
Go to impound. Third. No way. Third. Yeah! No way!
Phenomenal. Follow that up with a Mid-Ohio event where we ran into some more things between the power steering pump and a cracked oil pan, but we still were 1/10 of a second off of the podium and ended up in 4th place with a shortened Sunday. Go into Road America, and yeah, Road America, as it always does, seems to curse me and expose some issues that had been building throughout the year. But that was the first place where things really started to fall apart for the car. By the time we hit Autobahn, we had those issues pretty much resolved, and we ended up bringing home P2.
493, that's the new time to beat, and that's only a 10th off the track record, so he's flying right now. Granberg couldn't improve, and there's a look at it. 0.8 of a second is what Bryant needs to come out on top here. I don't know that he's shooting that high up the ladder, but he'd be stoked with a trophy. Kingtown, no pickup, 132.929.
Yeah, that time from Maroney is way ahead of what I think I was expecting to see out of this session.
I think everyone is going to be caught by surprise by this one. Feingold to second, 131.825 there. Knocks Granberg down to 3rd. Bryant to second, 131.751.
I can't say how good that feels in a car that we have effectively 1.5 years of development in one of the most competitive competition series. So yeah, overall, super positive.